You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. LSU football was back on the practice field on Thursday. There was media availability, after which Brian Kelly spoke. And this was the first time that the media had practice access since Jamar Cain was announced as the new defensive line coach of the Denver Broncos. Former Saints coach Sean Payton hiring away the LSU defensive line coach after just one season. And as I was told over the weekend, that happened very quickly. It was not something that had been percolating for a long time. Sean Payton targeted Jamar Cain. They made him a great offer. He had to move very quickly and did. So now Brian Kelly has to kind of fill the gaps here in spring and then start looking for a permanent replacement after spring football, which is kind of how we described what's taking place right now and who is taking over running the defensive line for spring.
You know, Coach Chapman, as you know, is a well-credentialed, experienced defensive line coach. So, you know, obviously he's coaching, you know, the interior defensive linemen during the spring. We feel great about that. And then Coach Jancic is coaching the Jacks. So from that perspective, you know, we'll go through the spring.
So they'll go through the spring with Gerald Chapman coaching the interior defensive line. Chapman was hired as a senior defensive analyst for LSU. His history, his resume includes a previous stop at LSU as a defensive analyst under Ed Ogeron and was not retained by Brian Kelly when Kelly was hired. He spent a season at Tulane as well. At the University of Colorado. He's been a GA at Texas A&M where he was in 2015. Then he went to Tennessee State in 2017. It's interesting that you have a guy. It was also in the NFL with the Cincinnati Bengals in 2019 and 2020. So, and then as we mentioned, from Tulane to Colorado and now back to LSU. So it's interesting in that you've got a guy who has NFL experience, a young guy, he's 35 years old. Young guy, NFL experience, has coached at Texas A&M, has coached at, Ball State and Butler as well, so smaller schools. He's been at LSU before, he's been at Tulane, so he's got experience in Louisiana and has experience as a defensive line coach at the major college level with Colorado. So you've got a guy with experience and ties to the state, which matter, especially when you're talking about recruiting. Brian Kelly was asked on Thursday about sort of the process of looking for the full-time replacement for Jamar Cain. Here's what he said.
We're, you know, putting together our thoughts relative to, you know, do we hire within? Do we go outside? And I think all of our options are on the table. We think it's important that, you know, this is a position that we examine all options. But again, we have, you know, outstanding coaches here, and we want to be able to get through the spring and then go from there.
You know, when Brian Kelly elevated John Jancic from a defensive analyst to the special teams coordinator and Jack linebackers coach, one of the things we talked about at the time was that when John Jancic came, remember, John Jancic and Brian Kelly have a great personal and working relationship. They have known each other for all the way back to the Grand Valley State days. And Jancic was on Kirby Smart's staff at Georgia. This is a guy who's been the defensive coordinator at Tennessee. Like, great major college experience as a defensive coordinator. Was at Georgia, won a national championship, and Brian Kelly lured him away to be on his staff a year ago in Baton Rouge, and John Jancic came as an analyst. And a lot of times those things are done with the understanding like, hey, just join my staff and in an off-field role this year, and in a year, we're gonna when things settle, we're gonna find an on-field role for you. And I believe that's what happened with Jancic. I believe John Jancic was going to be an on-field coach in 2023 either way. However it had to happen, it was going to happen. And it just so happened that LSU was really bad at special teams. They moved Brian Polian into an off-field role, and were able to move John Jancic back into an on-field role. Now, he's coached defense, he's coached linebackers, he's coached outside linebackers, so that was very natural. He's never coached special teams. So they had to sort of move a lot of the chess pieces around to figure out how they were going to make it work with special teams. My point being, if they knew Jamar Cain was leaving, it would have been so easy to make John Jancic your defensive line coach. Boom, done. And then you could go hire a true special teams coordinator. I don't know if they're going to do that now because they've already announced Jancic coaching special teams, and the Jack linebackers. Cain's out now. Do you go hire a defensive line coach? It's not to say they couldn't. I guess in theory you could, but how this all shuffles remains to be seen. But there's no reason to be too antsy or anxious with this move, however they're going to do it. Now, the other thing Kelly was asked is, what is he going to consider? What factors is he going to consider in hiring a new coach on the defensive line?
I think if you would just look at assembling a staff in the SEC, look at the position groups that make, such an important impact on your team. And I mean, you'd hard pressed to say that the defensive line is not as important as any position. So, recruiter and talent developing is got to be at the top of the list. So the ability to recruit in the SEC and develop talent is got to be 1A, 1B. So, what does that mean? I mean, I think it narrows your pool, from that perspective. Experience then comes into being part of that, right? You can't be an inexperienced, never been in the SEC or knows the recruiting of this landscape and be a qualified candidate.
Gerald Chapman checks a lot of those boxes. I'm not saying Brian Kelly is going to make that decision to promote from within, but something we talked about with the Jancic hire, or Jancic promotion, I should say, was how a lot of coaches are in a way following the model Nick Saban has, whereby you load up your support staff, and when you have turnover, inevitably, every place has it. Coaching is a transient business. When you have turnover in your on-field staff, you promote from your analysts, from your support staff, to an on-field job. That is a very natural way that things can happen, and you minimize disruption because you're promoting people from within that you already have on staff that know you, your players, your processes, all of that stuff, which makes for a more natural transition. Now, Gerald Chapman is new to LSU. Again, he was at LSU in 21. He was not retained by Kelly, so he went to Tulane and then was hired at Colorado, and he was right back at LSU. So you're talking about a guy that is still somewhat new, but knows the area, knows the landscape, knows the state, knows how to recruit, has been a coach at a lot of different places. Again, his resume goes Wisconsin, Oshkosh, Ball State, Butler, Texas A&M, Elon, Tennessee State, Cincinnati with the Bengals for 2 years, LSU, Tulane, Colorado. I mean, that's a lot of moves in 12 years. But he's bounced around and tried to make it, and we'll see if this is something that sticks. I'm not necessarily going to advocate for that, but I also believe there's merit to that process where you hire your support staff. It would not surprise me if LSU follows that same path with Bob Diaco. Bob Diaco was Kelly's a DC at Notre Dame, became the head coach at UConn. He's bounced around a bit. Now he's back with Kelly as an analyst. Analysts can now coach at practice, and it makes a lot of sense that eventually, when a spot opens, Bob Diaco would elevate, right? I mean, we saw Steve Sarkisian and Charlie Strong. Guys do that at Alabama. Guys be analysts at Alabama who Doug Marrone was an NFL head coach, was an analyst at Alabama. It just makes sense that that's sort of a way that you can build your depth, your bench depth, and then when you inevitably lose somebody, you can elevate. So Chapman's qualified to coach the defensive line, certainly qualified to do it during spring. We'll see if he's able to make enough of an impression to get that job full-time or if they look outside. But as Brian Kelly said, we won't know that until after spring game. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.